The air backstage at the Microsoft Theater in Los Angeles was electric. A thick soup of nervous energy, expensive cologne, and the faint scent of hairspray. Technicians in black shirts buzzed around with purpose, their headsets crackling with urgent, coded language. In the midst of this controlled chaos, Calvin Broadus, known to the world as Snoop Dogg, found a pocket of stillness in his designated dressing room. The room was standard celebrity issue. A brightly lit mirror framed by bare bulbs, a plush sofa, and a table laden with bottled water and a fruit platter that remained untouched. He was just sitting there, long legs stretched out, eyes closed. Wasn't tired, not really. It was a deeper feeling, a sense of temporal dissonance. Decades in the game, countless awards, #1 hits, and cultural moments that had defined generations. Yet, here he was, still in the whirlwind. He was supposed to present an award in 30 minutes, a simple read-the-teleprompter gig, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He felt the immense weight of the Snoop Dogg persona, a character he had created, nurtured, and who had, in many ways, taken on a life of its own, separate from the man, Calvin. The door to his dressing room creaked open slowly, not with the hurried confidence of a stage manager, but with a gentle hesitation. Snoop opened his eyes, his relaxed posture instantly sharpening with a flicker of curiosity. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright, frantic hallway, was Morgan Freeman. He held himself with an unmistakable quiet dignity, his eyes, full of a familiar, knowing warmth, surveying the room as if searching for a quiet harbor in a storm. He offered a small, apologetic smile. "Forgive the intrusion." Morgan's voice, as rich and resonant as it was on screen, filled the small room, instantly calming the ambient chaos. "It appears every other quiet corner in this labyrinth has been claimed. I was hoping for a moment of peace before the fray." Snoop felt an involuntary smile spread across his face, a genuine one. He gestured with a languid wave of his hand toward the empty end of the sofa, a silent invitation. The initial formality between two titans of their respective crafts was palpable. This wasn't a planned meeting, not a curated photo opportunity. It was a random intersection of two orbits, a chance encounter in the high-pressure vacuum behind the spectacle. Morgan Freeman, the voice of authority, of wisdom, of God in more than one film, stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. The cacophony of the hallway was instantly muted, replaced by a sudden, profound silence. The air shifted, charged with the unspoken histories and experiences of the two men, now sharing the same small, temporary space. Snoop watched as Morgan settled onto the couch, not with the weariness of an old man, but with the deliberate grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, regardless of the surroundings. There was no pretense, no air of superiority. He simply looked like a man seeking refuge, the same as anyone else might. This simple human act began to dissolve the invisible barrier of their monumental fame. It was in that shared silence that the foundation for a real conversation was unintentionally laid. The contrast between them was striking, a visual metaphor for their different worlds. Snoop, draped in a custom-tailored tracksuit of deep blue, velvet, adorned with subtle gold chains, represented the cutting edge of culture and music. Morgan, in a classic, impeccably tailored black tuxedo, embodied the timeless gravitas of cinematic royalty. Yet, beneath the external trappings, a shared understanding of a life lived in the public eye began to stir. A common language that few, others could ever truly comprehend. Snoop finally broke the silence, his voice smooth and low. "No doubt, man, it's a whole zoo out there tonight. Make yourself at home." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, a gesture of engagement. "It ain't every day a legend just walks into your room. An honor to have you." The compliment was sincere, stripped of any fanboy excitement, and delivered with the quiet respect of one professional acknowledging another. It was a simple opening, but it held the weight of mutual admiration. Morgan's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "The honor is mine, young man. I've been following your journey for longer than you might think. You've built more than a career. You've built an empire. That requires a different kind of strength, a different kind of vision. He spoke with a measured cadence, each word carefully chosen, carrying an unexpected depth that went far beyond the typical Backstage pleasantries. Snoop felt that the conversation was already veering away from the superficial. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of Morgan's words. It wasn't flattery. It felt like a genuine observation from someone who understood the architecture of a legacy. The initial awe of the encounter began to fade, replaced by a burgeoning sense of ease. He felt seen, not just as the celebrity, but as the architect behind the brand. The noise of the hallway, the impending awards show, all of it seemed to melt away further. "I appreciate that," Snoop replied, his gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes it feels more like a runaway train than an empire, you know? You just lay in the track right in front of it, hoping it don't go off the rails." He let out a soft chuckle, a sound that held a hint of fatigue. It was a candid admission, more vulnerable than he had intended, but it felt right in the presence of this man. The stage was being set for something more than just small talk. Morgan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply held Snoop's gaze, his expression one of deep, empathetic listening. In that moment, he wasn't Morgan Freeman, the movie star. He was a seasoned veteran of life, recognizing a familiar struggle in a younger counterpart. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was permissive, giving Snoop the space to continue if he chose to. And something inside of him, something that had been sitting quietly for a long time, decided to. The hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound for a long moment. Snoop found himself staring at the intricate design on his own sneakers, gathering his thoughts. It was strange. He could command a stadium of 80,000 people, but here, in this quiet room, he felt a pull to speak about things he usually kept locked away. He looked up, meeting Morgan's patient gaze, and decided to lean into the moment, to be Calvin for a minute instead of Snoop. "You know," Snoop began, his voice taking on a more contemplative tone, "you talk about strength. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Not the kind of strength to be on top, but the kind of strength it takes to just be. After all the years, all the lights, all the noise. How do you hold on to the part of you that was there before any of this started?" The question hung in the air, raw and unfiltered, a departure from the cool, untouchable persona he was known for. Morgan's expression didn't change, but a flicker of deep understanding passed through his eyes. He had heard variations of this question before, from young actors, from seasoned directors, from people grappling with the immense pressure of public life. He didn't offer a quick, easy answer. Instead, he shifted his weight on the couch, turning slightly to face Snoop more directly, giving the question the respect it deserved. It was a query about the soul, and he treated it as such. That's the great paradox, isn't it? Morgan's voice was gentle, yet it carried an undeniable authority. The world falls in love with an image you create, a role you play, a sound you perfect, and they want you to be that, always. They celebrate it, they pay for it, and in return, you risk forgetting the person who dreamed it all up in the first place. It's a gilded cage, and the door is often held open by your own success. Snoop nodded, a profound sense of recognition washing over him. A gilded cage. That was exactly what it felt like sometimes. Beautiful, luxurious, but a cage nonetheless. He thought about his early days in Long Beach. The hunger, the ambition. It was all so clear then. Now the lines were blurred. Was he the artist, or was he the art? The question had been a low hum in the back of his mind for years, but now it was a ringing bell. "So how do you do it?" Snoop pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Man, you've been at the absolute peak forever. You're more than an actor. You're a landmark. When you walk into a room, people don't just see a man. They see the warden from Shawshank. They see God. They see the president. How does Morgan Freeman get to just be Morgan Freeman?" He felt a surge of genuine curiosity, needing to understand the mechanics of this man's inner peace. Morgan allowed a soft, rumbling laugh to escape him. "First, you must understand that Morgan Freeman, the landmark as you call him, doesn't actually exist. He's a collection of stories, of light and shadow on a screen, of words written by other people. He is a magnificent phantom, and I am his caretaker. I respect the phantom. I give him a voice. but I do not let him live in my house. My house is reserved for me. The concept of being a caretaker for his own public image struck Snoop with the force of a revelation. He had always seen it as a battle, a constant struggle to integrate the two identities or keep them separate. The idea of a peaceful coexistence, a respectful stewardship, was entirely new. It suggested a level of detachment that he had never considered possible, a way to honor the creation without being consumed by it. He pays the bills, of course, Morgan added with a wry twinkle in his eye, so I have a great deal of respect for him, but his worries are not my worries. His ego is not my ego. When I go home, I am not narrating my life. I am living it. I am a beekeeper. I am a sailor. I am a man who enjoys watching the sunset. The landmark has no time for such things. I make the time. The simplicity of it was disarming. A beekeeper, a sailor. These weren't roles. They were realities, grounding mechanisms, anchors to the man who existed long before the Phantom was born. Snoop thought about his own life outside the studio and the stage. He had his family, his youth football league, his business ventures. But were they true anchors, or were they just extensions of the Snoop Dogg brand? The question lingered uncomfortably. He realized the conversation had shifted from a casual chat to something far more significant. It was a masterclass being delivered in the quiet of a dressing room, a lesson not in fame, but in survival. Morgan wasn't preaching. He was sharing a blueprint. The secret wasn't a secret at all. It was a choice, a deliberate, conscious decision to cultivate a life that the spotlight could not reach, a garden where the self could grow untended by public opinion. So you build a different house, Snoop said, more to himself than to Morgan, piecing the idea together. A place the persona can't get into. It sounded so simple, yet he knew it was the hardest work of all. It required a discipline beyond artistry, a commitment to one's own sanity. The ice hadn't just been broken, it had been shattered, revealing the deep, flowing waters of a truth he had been thirsting for without even knowing it. Snoop leaned back, into the plush cushions of the sofa, the velvet of his suit feeling suddenly heavy. The Snoop Dogg persona, the one he had meticulously crafted since he was a teenager, felt like a physical weight pressing on his chest. It was the armor that had protected him, the engine that had propelled him. But now, in this quiet confession, he felt the deep exhaustion of wearing it for so long. He had to make this man understand. This character, this Snoop Dogg, he started, his voice low and raspy. He was born out of necessity. He was the cool, calm, untouchable cat from the LBC. Nothing could faze him. He walked through fire and came out the other side with his braids still fresh. That was the brand. That was the protection. Back then, you needed that armor to survive. The streets, to survive the industry. He paused, the memories flickering behind his eyes. But then, he continued, gesturing with his hands as if trying to physically shape the thought. The world changes. You change. I'm a father, a grandfather, a businessman. I got a whole youth football league full of kids looking up to me. I'm not that same young man anymore. But the persona, he's kind of frozen in time. People expect the OG, the dog father, every time I step out. And I give it to them. It's what they love. He looked directly at Morgan, his eyes pleading for understanding. The problem is, sometimes I feel like I'm just a guest in my own life. Calvin is the one doing the work, feeling the stress, loving his family. But Snoop Dogg gets all the credit and has all the fun. And there's a disconnect there, you know? A gap between the man doing the living and the image getting the love. And I wonder, when it's all said and done, who will they remember? Morgan listened with an unwavering, compassionate intensity. He didn't interrupt, didn't nod, didn't offer any placating gestures. He simply gave the man before him the profound gift of his complete attention, allowing the weight of the confession to settle in the room. He understood that this was not a complaint about fame, but a lament about identity, a crisis of the soul that was common among those who had lived as icons. They'll remember the one you show them, Morgan said finally, his voice soft but clear. And that, my friend, is both the burden and the opportunity. You feel this gap because you've grown, but you haven't allowed the persona to grow with you in the same way. You've kept him preserved in amber because you think that's what the world demands. You fear that if you show them more of Calvin, they will no longer love Snoop Dogg. The truth of that statement hit Snoop like a physical blow. He had been so focused on maintaining the brand, on protecting the legacy, that he had inadvertently stunted its growth. He had treated the persona like a static photograph instead of a living, breathing entity capable of evolution. He was the creator, yet he had become subservient to his own creation, afraid to tamper with the formula that had brought him so much success. Fear. Snoop repeated the word, tasting it. Yeah, maybe that's it. Fear that if the dog father starts talking about his grandkids' soccer games or his worries about the future, the whole thing falls apart. The mystique is gone. The cool is gone. And what's left? He left the question hanging in the air, the vulnerability of it exposed and raw. It was the central fear of any performer. Will they still love me when the mask comes off? What's left is a human being, Morgan stated simply, with no hint of judgment. What's left is authenticity, and there is nothing more cool, nothing with more mystique than a man who is brave enough to be wholly himself. The world doesn't just need Snoop Dogg, the icon. It also needs Calvin Broadus, the man who navigated the fire and came out the other side with wisdom to share. The armor was for the battle. But what do you do when the war is over? Snoop felt a knot in his stomach begin to loosen. The war is over. In many ways, it was. The struggle for survival, for recognition, for a place at the table, he had won. The current battle was an internal one, fight for integration and peace. He had been so busy being a legend that he had forgotten how to be a man in public. He had protected the persona so fiercely that he had locked himself inside of it. He thought of the kids in his football league. He taught them about discipline, about overcoming adversity, about being good men. Yet, he wasn't fully showing them the man he had become. He was showing them a character. The hypocrisy of it, however unintentional, stung him. He wanted his legacy to be more than just hit records and a famous brand. He wanted it to be one of genuine, hard-won evolution. "You're giving me a lot to think about, man," Snoop said, a sense of weary gratitude in his voice. "I came in here just to chill before I go on stage, and now I'm questioning my whole existence." He managed a small laugh, but it was colored with the gravity of the moment. This chance encounter was becoming a pivotal point, a moment of reckoning that he never saw coming. Morgan offered a gentle smile. "The most important questions have a habit of finding us in the quietest rooms. The answers are already in you, Calvin. You just needed someone to turn the lights on so you could see them." The use of his given name was deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement of the man behind the persona. The conversation had reached a new level of depth, a true meeting of minds and spirits. This is the kind of conversation that changes things. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, let us know in the comments below. What do you think Snoop's legacy really is? And don't forget to like this video to let us know you want more stories like this. Now, let's get back to the dressing room, because the biggest revelation is yet to come. Morgan leaned forward, his posture mirroring Snoop's, creating a small, intimate circle of shared space between them. "Let me tell you something about personas," he began, his voice dropping into the familiar narrative cadence that had captivated millions. "I was once trapped by one too. Not as flashy as yours perhaps, but just as restrictive. For years, I was the dignified, wise black man. That was my box. I was the noble friend, the sagacious judge, the patient mentor." He paused, letting the image sink in. "And it was a good box. It paid for my boat. It earned me respect. But it was a box all the same. Every script that came my way wanted that. Every interviewer wanted me to dispense wisdom on command. They didn't want Morgan, the man who sometimes gets angry in traffic, who tells a bad joke, who once struggled mightily with his own demons. They wanted the phantom I had helped create." Snoop listened, completely engrossed. He had never considered that Morgan Freeman could have ever felt confined. From the outside, his career looked like a seamless ascent into cinematic sainthood. To hear that he had faced a similar crisis of identity, was both shocking and immensely comforting. It was proof that this struggle was not his alone. It was a fundamental tax on a certain kind of success. The path he was on had been walked before. There was a time, Morgan continued, his gaze distant, lost in a memory. After Shawshank and Seven, when the wise persona was at its peak, I was at a dinner party, a very lavish affair, and a man, a very powerful producer, came up to me and, without any sense of irony, asked me to narrate what he was doing as he picked up a canapé. "Narrate my snack for me, Morgan," he said, laughing. He thought it was a brilliant party trick. Snoop winced. The casual disrespect, the reduction of a man to a gimmick, was all too familiar. He'd had people bark at him in public or ask him to drop it like it's hot at the most inappropriate times. He understood the feeling of being seen not as a person, but as a living, breathing meme. He saw the flicker of old frustration in Morgan's eyes, a shadow of the man who had endured the insult. "In that moment," Morgan said, his voice firm, "I had a choice. I could play along, be the good-natured celebrity and give the man his party trick. Or I could be myself. I could be the man who was deeply offended by the reduction of his life's work into a cheap joke. I looked at him and I said, I'm not a jukebox. The voice you hear in the movies is a performance. Right now, you are talking to the man. And the man is not amused." The dressing room was silent. Snoop could vividly picture the scene. The stunned producer. The awkward silence at the dinner party. It took a kind of courage he wasn't sure he possessed. The courage to disappoint, to be difficult, to choose your own dignity over someone else's comfort. It was a quiet rebellion, a declaration of independence for the soul. The power of that moment resonated decades later in this small room. The man was shocked, Morgan recalled with a slight, satisfied smile. He didn't know what to do, but from that day forward, I made a promise to myself. I would not perform Morgan Freeman in my own life. I would lend his voice to projects I believed in. I would inhabit characters that fascinated me. But when I walked off the set, he stayed there. It was the beginning of my liberation. It was the moment I started building the other house we spoke of. This was the blueprint laid bare. It wasn't one grand act, but a series of small, firm decisions. It was drawing a line in the sand, first for oneself and then for others. It was about defining your own terms of engagement with the world. Snoop realized he had rarely, if ever, drawn that line. He had always blurred it, believing that was part of the job, part of maintaining the laid-back, agreeable Snoop Dogg brand. "So you just said no," Snoop mused, the idea both terrifying and exhilarating. "You risked them calling you difficult, an asshole even." He knew the politics of the industry. Being agreeable was currency. Rocking the boat, especially when you were on top, was seen as a cardinal sin. It was a risk that could have tangible consequences on the roles he was offered and the way he was perceived by the public. Morgan nodded gravely. "I did, and perhaps some did. But you reach a point in your life and career where the respect you have for yourself must outweigh the love you hope to receive from others. The people who matter, the ones who see the man, and not just the phantom, will respect you more for it. The others were never really your audience in the first place. They were just fans of a ghost." Snoop felt a profound shift in his own perspective. The fear he had spoken of earlier began to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of empowerment. Morgan hadn't offered a magical solution but a practical, courageous strategy. The power had been his all along. The power to define himself, to present a more whole, more authentic version to the world. The power to let Calvin and Snoop coexist, each in his own proper space. The air in the room was now thick with revelation. Snoop felt like a student who had just had a complex theorem explained in simple, elegant terms. The abstract weight on his shoulders now had a name and a structure, and he could see a path to deconstructing it. But it was Morgan's next words that would truly anchor the lesson, transforming it from a powerful idea into an unforgettable emotional truth. "The hardest part," Morgan said, his voice softening even more, "wasn't saying no to producers. It was a moment of doubt, long before I had the power to say no to anyone. I was doing theater in New York, struggling. I was broke. I was tired. And the phantom of Morgan Freeman, acclaimed actor, was nowhere to be found. He was just a distant, impossible dream. I was just a man failing to pay his rent. He described the grim reality of that time with a vividness that transported Snoop from the plush dressing room to a cramped, cold water flat in the 1970s. He spoke of the auditions that went nowhere, the hope that dwindled with each rejection, the gnawing voice of doubt that whispered he had made a terrible mistake, that he should have stayed in the Air Force, that he was chasing a fool's dream. The vulnerability in his voice was profound. I was at my lowest point, Morgan confessed. I had a young daughter to think of. I was about to quit. I decided I would go to one more audition, and if it didn't work out, I would pack my bags and find a real job. I was done. The dream was dead. The night before, I sat in my apartment, and I felt a sense of grief that was so total, so absolute. It was for the man I had failed to become. Snoop was motionless, barely breathing. This was a story he had never heard, a peek behind the curtain of the legend that was so raw and human it felt almost sacred. This wasn't the wise narrator. This was a man who had been broken, who had stood on the precipice of giving up everything he had ever wanted. He saw a reflection of his own past struggles, the moments when his own journey could have easily ended, before it began. And then, Morgan's eyes seemed to look through the wall, back in time. The phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't call often. It was too expensive. She had no idea I was about to quit. She just said, "I was just sitting here, thinking about you. And I wanted to tell you that I am already so proud of the man you are. Not the actor you're trying to be. You are a good man, Morgan. That's all that ever matters to me." He took a deep, shaky breath, the memory still potent after all these years. Her words, they were like a key that unlocked me. She didn't care about the phantom. She didn't even see him. She saw her son. She reminded me of who I was at my core. I wasn't Morgan Freeman, the failed actor. I was Morgan Freeman, a good man. And a good man doesn't quit on himself. He endures. Tears welled in Morgan's eyes, and he did not wipe them away. They were a testament to the power of that moment, a tribute to the woman who had, with a few simple words, saved his career, and perhaps his soul. He had been so focused on becoming something else that he had forgotten the value of what he already was. His mother's unconditional love reminded him that his worth was not tied to his success. Snoop felt his own throat tighten. He thought of his own mother, his wife, his children, their love for Calvin, the man. It was the bedrock of his entire life, the foundation upon which the Snoop Dogg empire had been built. He had been so worried about his legacy in the eyes of the world that he had momentarily forgotten that his true legacy was already secure in the hearts of those who loved the man, not the persona. "I went to the audition the next day," Morgan said, his voice steady again. "I didn't go with the desperation of a man who needed a job. I went with the freedom of a man who was already enough. I didn't need their approval, and because I didn't need it, I was free. I performed with a sense of play, of joy, and I got the part. It wasn't a big part, but it was a start. It was the turning point. All because she reminded me who I was." The story settled in the room, a powerful testament to the anchoring force of love and authentic self-worth. This was the final piece of the puzzle for Snoop. The solution wasn't just attachment, it was connection. Connection to the core self, and connection to the people who knew and loved that self. The persona was a vehicle, but family, love, and self-worth, that was the fuel. "Man," Snoop breathed out, the word full of emotion. That's everything, right there." He finally understood. It wasn't about killing the persona or hiding from it. It was about grounding himself so deeply, in his own truth, in Calvin's truth, that the persona could never overtake him. It was about knowing that if Snoop Dogg disappeared tomorrow, the man who mattered, the good man, would remain. A sharp rap on the door broke the spell. "5 minutes, Mr. Dogg," a voice called from the hallway. The outside world was rushing back in. The awards show, the cameras, the expectations, they were all waiting. But something inside Snoop had been fundamentally rewired. The wait was gone. replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose that he hadn't felt in years. He stood up not as Snoop Dogg, the icon, but as Calvin Broadus, a man who was finally at peace with all parts of himself. Snoop stood and stretched, his tall frame seeming looser, less burdened than when he first sat down. He looked at Morgan, who was also rising from the couch, the moment of shared intimacy drawing to a close as the demands of their public lives beckoned. There was no need for a long, drawn-out goodbye. The understanding that had been forged between them in this short time was deeper than words. It was a bond of shared experience, a quiet alliance of the soul. "Thank you," Snoop said, the two words carrying the gravity of the entire conversation. "For real. Thank you, man. You have no idea." He extended his hand, not for a celebrity handshake, but a genuine clasp of gratitude. His grip was firm, a silent acknowledgement of the strength he had drawn from this unexpected encounter. He felt like he had just been given a map to a place he had been searching for his whole life. Morgan took his hand, his grasp equally firm, his eyes warm and sincere. "You're a good man, Calvin Broadus," he said, pointedly using his birth name. "Again. Don't you ever forget that. The rest is just noise. Enjoy the noise, dance to it, but don't ever mistake it for the music of your own heart." It was the final piece of wisdom, a parting gift to carry with him back into the whirlwind. Just as they were about to part ways, a young production assistant, headset askew, hesitantly pushed the door open. "Mr. Freeman, they're ready for you. In the green room. And Mr. Dogg, it's time to head to the stage." She looked between the two men, her eyes wide with awe. She had been sent to fetch them, and had overheard the last few lines, a snippet of a conversation that felt far too profound for the frantic energy of Backstage. The assistant was momentarily stunned into silence, unable to process the quiet intensity she had just walked in on. She had expected to find them talking about sports, or music, or movies. Instead, she had stumbled upon something that felt deeply personal, almost sacred. The air was charged with a kind of emotional electricity. She saw the tear tracks on Morgan Freeman's face, and the look of serene clarity in Snoop Dogg's eyes. And she knew she had witnessed a moment that was not meant for her. Snoop gave Morgan a final, knowing nod. "Go handle your business, OG," he said with a genuine, easy smile. The cool was back, but it was different now. It wasn't a shield. It was an authentic expression of a man at ease with himself. It was a cool that emanated from a place of inner peace, not from a carefully constructed image. It was the calm of a man who knew exactly who he was. Morgan smiled back. "And you yours." With a final glance, he turned and walked out the door, disappearing back into the stream of Backstage life, leaving the scent of quiet wisdom in his wake. The production assistant, still looking speechless, simply pointed down the hall, indicating the way to the stage for Snoop. She couldn't form words, her mind replaying the fragment of dialogue she had heard. "Don't ever mistake it for the music of your own heart." Snoop started his walk toward the stage, his stride long and confident. The usual pre-performance jitters were gone. He wasn't thinking about the teleprompter, or the millions of people watching, or the persona he was supposed to project. He was thinking about his mother, his wife, his grandkids. He was thinking about being a beekeeper. He was thinking about the quiet house where the phantom wasn't allowed to live. As he stepped into the wings, waiting for his cue, the roar of the crowd washed over him. It was a familiar sound, one that had defined his life for 3 decades. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he heard it differently. It was no longer the sound of expectation, of demand. It was the sound of celebration. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they were celebrating all of it. The man, the myth, the journey. He walked out onto the stage, into the blinding white lights, and a genuine, brilliant smile spread across his face. He was Snoop Dogg, yes, but he was also Calvin Broadus. He was the icon, and he was the man. And for the first time, they were walking together, in perfect harmony. The audience roared, completely unaware of the profound, life-altering conversation that had just taken place a few hundred feet away. The production assistant stood by the door, watching him on a monitor. She would tell people for years about the day she saw Snoop Dogg and Morgan Freeman backstage, about the inexplicable feeling in that room. She would tell them how they looked, But she could never fully explain the depth of what she had sensed. The real story, the one that truly left everyone speechless, remained in the quiet of that dressing room, a secret shared between two legends. True legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's the truth you learn to live in. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with who you'd want to see have a conversation like this. Until next time, remember to listen for the music of your own heart.